John, how's it going, my friend?
Rem, I am doing fantastic. Excited to jump on this podcast conversation with you.
Yes, thank you very much for coming on Dads with Mics. I'm really excited about today's topic. But first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's John Tyreman, and I am a husband, father, business owner, serial podcaster, amateur gardener, and part-time musician. That's kind of like what I like to use to describe myself. So I've got three kids, two boys and a girl, 8, 6, and 4. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell right there.
All right, very nice. You have an interesting story, John, and I want to get right into it because I feel like this is we're gonna go deep dive into what happened with you and
Yeah.
how your kids were born. And I can sort of relate as well because I had some form of it. And so tell us a little bit about what happened with your first two kids. I believe they were both C-sections, correct?
Yeah. So, I think first of all, I just want to say that like when I say we, I mean husbands, fathers, and even mothers to some extent, we've been conditioned to believe that birth happens in a hospital or with some form of credentialed medical intervention, right? So whether that's a midwife or someone who's licensed by the state to oversee some sort of birth. And this is just accepted as common practice by any expecting parents, right? And so, but if you like zoom out, you can really like see that this is a new development in humanity, right? And I don't know, are you familiar with the movie The Business of Being Born?
No.
You should totally watch that because I mean, if you think about it, hospitals are a business, right?
Yeah.
And birth by nature is unpredictable. But what hospitals try to do is they try to create a process where if labor is going too long, we need to transfer. Essentially, they need to turn tables like a restaurant, right?
Right.
And that mindset, that focus on the bottom line and profit within a hospital business is creating this system that is not conducive to natural birth. And I think that was kind of like the big takeaway based on my experience with my three kids. So, we can come back to that a little bit. But to answer your question, Rem, I'll get into kind of the story of my three kids. So
Sure.
in 2015, um, my wife and I wanted a natural home birth. This was our first child. We weren't even married yet. We were, found out that my wife Chelsea found out she was pregnant, and then we wanted a natural home birth. We didn't want to go to a hospital. That whole thing. It's we're wide-eyed and bushy-tailed first-time parents, right? Or not even at that point. So we went out and we did some research and we found some midwives, right? Then they were gonna come to our house and they would kind of be there to guide us. We hadn't done anything like this, but then there was an intervention, right? We didn't know what we didn't know at the time, and they gave Chelsea some castor oil, and then that kind of like that was the intervention that like caused us to like question everything, and then just kind of unraveled from there. We ended up transferring to a hospital, which again is not an environment conducive to birth. Just real quick, if you think about mammals in general, right? Look at cows, look at horses, look at pigs. Like what happens when a female has birth? They find a cozy, dark place to give birth, and the males are there to like protect, right?
Yeah.
That's like the exact opposite of a hospital. There's fluorescent lights. There's not comfy. There's people coming in and interrupting mom, this, that, and the other. There's gadgets, there's sounds whizzing, nurses coming in and out. And that's no environment that's conducive for birth, right? Um, and so we ended up having an emergency C-section for our first son, Bodie. And then, that kind of shaped our experience a little bit. In 2018, my wife and I were expecting our second. And so we wanted a VBAC in a hospital. So VBAC stands for vaginal birth after cesarean, for those who don't know. And so we found a female OB, which was something that my wife wanted. She didn't want a man, she wanted a female.
Yeah,
So
that's the
that,
case for
the
a lot of women.
yeah, right. And we thought that that was a good fit and everything
Mhm.
with like signs were pointing great. But see, the problem is that my wife went into labor on a Thursday and she wanted to get out for the weekend. The doctor did. And
Okay.
so she pressured us into an induction and a C-section so that she could get out for the weekend. Yeah, and so he was born at 41 weeks, which if you really like if you I don't know how much research you've done on birth, but like 42 weeks is like pretty normal
The standard.
in
Yeah.
terms of like a full like you know a, baby that's ready to be born.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so we were pressured into an induction and an eventual C-section. And then so not too much later in 2019, my wife and I, we were expecting our third. And at this point, the trust in the medical system was just shattered at that point, right?
Understandably.
And so we want, well, like my wife was just kind of like doing some research and okay, so what are some other ways we could go about this? And it's just like, well, fuck it, right? We just like let's have the kid at home. And my wife was started like got introduced to this whole concept of free birth. And essentially, what we did was there wasn't a doctor, there wasn't a midwife at home. It was just my wife and I, and one of those inflatable pools in our room. And so her water broke, labored in the night. Grandparents came over, took the boys, and so she labored for about an hour or so. And our daughter Joanna was born at home in a water tub. It was great, right? Our mistake was that we called a midwife to come after the baby was born to kind of check up.
Okay.
And I say that that was a mistake because the placenta was still attached for a little bit longer
Okay.
than, the midwife's experience. And, in hindsight, looking back, it's normal for a placenta to stay attached for up to 10 hours.
10 hours.
Um,
Okay.
right. Yeah. And so she didn't, she thought, okay, well, it's a little too long. What I can do is I can pull the placenta out. Right. And this was just like we had done a bunch of research. We've got some experience, right? And this was something that was like, oh, okay, I guess so. And I'll tell you what, man, this was something else. So she pulled out the midwife did. She pulled out this like packet of this medicine. It's like this Chinese medicine that like coagulates your blood.
Okay.
And she gave it to my wife. And then she violently yanked on the umbilical cord. Right. And then like everything inside my body is screaming, no, no, no. So what happened was my wife just passed out. She just fainted. And then I turned to the midwife and like just horrified look on my face. She was like, it's time to call 911. And I said, okay.
No.
So I called 911, ambulance. Um, Following the ambulance in my car to the hospital with a newborn in the car seat. That was just that was like one of the most wildest, craziest experiences of my life. Um,
That's
so we get to
wild.
the hospital. Yeah. Dude, this is just the tip of the iceberg, man. We get to the hospital and wife explains like I explain my wife has come to at that point, so she's explaining what's going on. Um, they wanted to do a DNC scope, which is essentially they go in and they scrape the inside of the uterus, right?
Okay.
Because they wanted to understand what the problem was. Well, what happened in the hospital will deny this. We believe that DNC scope caused another uterine rupture, which caused more internal bleeding. She had to go in for a second surgery. I thought I was going to lose my wife. Um, and then yeah, so that was that was our experience. And so like, after a week of in the hospital recovering, like we were able to go home and everything. But man, that was just like, in hindsight, I wish we just didn't even have a midwife. I wish we
Right.
just said, screw it, let's just do this ourselves at home. And I think like once you introduce intervention or fear into birth, that's when trouble arises.
Now, did all of this happen because of what the midwife did, or
There
how?
is there's no way of knowing for sure,
Okay.
but that is what I that was the single moment in time where everything changed, was when the midwife pulled the placenta.
And was she along for the process, or is somebody that you had in your phone book as in your contacts in case
Yes.
something happens, but she didn't go through the whole pregnancy with your wife and yourself as a coach or anything. You didn't keep her in the loop of what was going on.
We
You
we
did.
I'm sorry, I totally didn't mention that. Yeah, we did a visit. I think we did two visits with her prior to birth, and she was on call. She was expecting to come over after the child was born.
Oh, it was okay, it was planned.
It was planned. The only thing is we did not want her at the actual birth event.
Got it. Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's quite a story. And I mean, it's unbelievable how it went down. I'm just shocked for the people listening. Like my face was just like in awe and shock.
Well, my goal in sharing this story is, number one, I want to bring awareness to the fact that there are alternatives to going to a hospital, because there are so many people that I talk to who say, "Oh yeah, and then we had an emergency C-section. Oh yeah, we had an emergency C-section." It's so common, and
Yeah.
it's almost like it's the norm these days. At least just based on my anecdotal experience talking with other moms and dads.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you experienced that?
It seems like it's a very quick go-to for doctors.
Yeah,
It doesn't seem like they go through a process of, oh, okay, well, this will be the last resort. It seems like it's the first resort.
exactly. Because
And
they're trying to turn tables.
look, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert or anything, but because I'm not, but it seems to me like that's not how it was done historically. It wasn't.
Right.
So why is that so common these days?
I would say it's just scale. Businesses at scale is a product of the Industrial Revolution and the society that we as humans have created today, right? And so we that a business is I come from the world of business, and so that's the perspective that I look at this. And from a business point of view, you're trying to scale the throughput in your hospital. So the amount of beds available, you want to make sure that they keep turning so that you can flow people through. And I think like the the spirit of it originally was, we want to get people healed fast, right?
Yeah,
And so we want to get people in and out so that they can get on with their lives. But I don't think that that's the right approach to take with birth. It's not, birth isn't a medical emergency. And that's
right.
what hospitals are designed for. And I think that's probably like the crux of the problem.
Yeah, you think of hospitals, you think it's somewhere you go when you're really sick,
Right.
and what kind of environment is that? Not only for the woman who's about to give birth, it's not a peaceful place. It's not a beautiful place where you could say proudly, "Oh yes, my son or my daughter was born here." It was such an amazing experience. I don't think anybody says that. Whereas you hear a lot more about home births or even birthing centers, which is
Mhm.
where my wife gave birth to both our children. It was sort of like a hotel more than anything. And she had her own private room,
Yeah.
and it wasn't like there were no machines or anything. It just looked like a hotel room with a bath in it, in the middle of the room, if she wanted to use. And it was just such a peaceful experience as opposed to what you hear. And I don't know, I can't compare. I have to say that I didn't
Every story is
go
different.
through. Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I mean, I can't compare it to the hospital experience because we didn't do it. Both of
Yeah.
our children were born in a birthing center with a midwife, and I think we were lucky. We found a midwife that was just amazing, so supportive, so attentive to what we wanted, and it went amazingly. And there was a backup plan in case of an emergency. So if something goes wrong, but they're equipped there at the birthing center, they're obviously equipped to monitor the heart and all that of the kid. Um, and the hospital was not that far in case of an emergency. And they said, you know what, if anything happens, we call 911 and the ambulance comes over. Don't worry about it. But it was all said, very matter of fact and in a calm manner. No stress whatsoever in the entire process. And I cannot be more happy and grateful as to how it went down. It was such a beautiful experience, and I'm so grateful to have lived it in a birthing center as opposed to a hospital because I hear of all these stories that happen in hospitals. I just read the other day online that 1 in 6 women who give birth in a hospital were victims of abuse, whether from a health practitioner in terms of a physical abuse or emotional abuse or not being taken care of properly. 1 in 6.
Wow. Yeah.
That seems really high. And so
That
I
doesn't
understand.
surprise me.
It surprised me when I read it. I mean, I again, I don't have that much experience with it, and especially since I didn't live through it myself. We did the home, well, not the home birth, but the birth with a
Birthing
midwife
center.
at a birthing center. So I can't compare it. But you went through it, and I know many others, and most of them do. I don't. You know what? In my community where I am, I think we're the only ones that we know in our circle of friends or family that have done the birthing center birth.
Really?
I don't know anybody else. So I don't know if it's more common in the States, but here, at least where I am in Montreal or in Quebec in general, uh, I don't personally know anybody who's done it. Maybe my
Wow.
wife does, but I don't. And I think she would have heard about it because you know what? And that's another thing that we could talk about. When my
Sure.
wife told her friends and her family that we were going to do this, a lot of faces
Questions.
like,
Right. Yeah. Well,
what do you
that is a
mean?
whole,
What do you mean you're not gonna
yes.
go to the hospital? You're not gonna be followed by a doctor?
Right.
Uh, are you okay? What's wrong with you? And a lot of
Yeah.
them actually said that outright. And the others were you could see it in their eyes that they were looking at you like, that's weird, man. What do you mean?
And that is the first of many moments where as a husband, you need to take the bullets. You know how like I'm a big football fan, and when Roger Goodell gets up and does the press conferences for the NFL, he just takes the bullets, right? As a husband and as you know, of a wife who's expecting, you got to take the bullets, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to be the one to handle those questions because fear spoils birth. And those questions create fear and doubt. And that can cause a woman's body to shut down during birth. And so it's our jobs as, their partner to take those bullets, to shield them from the negativity and create a space, a container where she can, have birth in peace. And I think that's like, I was telling my wife that I was coming on this podcast, and she was like, yeah, choosing a person to be with you during your child's birth is like choosing who you'd want to trip on mushrooms with, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like it's very similar. Like if you
Yeah.
introduce like
I see it.
negative energy, it like
Right.
can cause problems.
Did you guys have that support at least from your family or in your friends, or is it like me and everybody's looking at you like you're an alien?
Dude, when you said that, it just same experience.
Oh yeah.
Like my our immediate family, like they were like very like questioning at first, and then they kind of accepted it, but still had questions. And like it was more about them and them feeling comfortable than it was about my wife and I feeling comfortable. And I think that's kind of like that's what rubbed me a little bit of the wrong way was like it became less about us and the birth and what we wanted and how we wanted that to happen, and more about how they felt.
Yeah, that's an odd thing. The grandmothers especially who want to be there, right, with their daughter.
And
Uh,
that's a natural maternal instinct,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it is.
And
My wife personally did not want her mother there. Uh, she had her reasons, you know.
yep,
She wanted it to be me and her, and that's it, with the midwife, obviously.
sure.
And I guess, well, luckily I'm not, it seems to be that I'm the only calming presence like that's around her. So that's what I can do.
Yeah.
And I don't think she knew that having her mother there would stress her out more than anything. And it's not
And
nothing to say against
yeah,
my mother-in-law. It's just that's just how it is. Uh, her mother probably would have made her nervous.
exactly.
So she didn't, and we made it clear to all the grandmothers that we didn't want anybody there during the birth. And actually, they came over after the fact, and when we went back home the next day, back home, a couple of days we were at home, and then said okay, and we organized it. All right, so you guys come to today, and then the others tomorrow. Um, just because having so many people there at the same time, it's just even if they're nice people, it's not about that. It's just having a lot of people there during this such a private, intimate moment. It's stressful. It's weird.
It is. When we were trying to have a home birth for our firstborn, and my wife Chelsea, she was laboring in our room, and we had family there, and that was a mistake, right? Downstairs they were watching a movie, and they we heard like laughter and laughing while my wife was trying to give birth, and it was like she was like, God, tell them to turn that TV off, right? She wanted silence and like calmness,
Obviously.
and so yeah, it sounds like you did a great job at setting expectations for the grandparents and then being that calming presence for your wife, which is exactly what she needed to give birth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's not easy to deal with. You don't want to piss off anybody, but you gotta think of your wife in this case. She's the priority on that day, and at
Yeah.
least the next couple of days as well. So that's what I had in mind, and I just needed her to be as calm and peaceful as possible. And so that was the idea, and I think it went really well. But John, I'm curious more about what's the plan that you need to put into place if you want to have a free birth or a home birth. Like it couldn't have
Mm.
been so easy, and having the first two done by C-section in a hospital,
Yeah.
then planning for a free birth, which is what you did. And to be clear to the listeners, a free birth is unassisted birth, right? So there's
Right.
no doctor, no midwife, no doula, no nothing. It's just you and your wife at home, right? And nobody's there.
Hmm.
So what do you need to do to make sure that it goes well and prepare for it equipment wise? What do you do in case of an emergency, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I can only speak to our experience. I'm sure that there are many different ways to do that. There's a free birth society that is a collective of women who talk about this topic. Folks that are listening to this are probably dads. Mention that to your wife. Maybe they can go and check that out if they're interested in something like that. Um, but yeah, your question about what our plan was, we had, like I mentioned, we had a midwife that we were talking to. We had our two previous births to lean on as experience, for what to expect. And we had, in case of emergency, there's the hospital in 911, which we ended up having to use. So that was the plan, right? Best
Yeah.
case scenario is she was born at home, and she was. Joanna was born at home. It was a beautiful birth. was born in a water tub. I caught her and handed her to Chelsea, and watched her first breath, and um that was just like, and then the feeling of knowing that we did that ourselves on our own, we accomplished our goal. That was like, that was one of the most fulfilling moments of my entire life, was just the fact that we went through that journey together, and that brought us together as a couple. um it was a big middle finger to the medical system, and so that made me happy and smile. But yeah, I would say that, a lot of what, like, the planning that goes into it, it's not so much logical planning as it is emotional planning.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is feeling confident, and being able to minimize fear, and those negative emotions, and having the emotional intelligence to be able to do that. And then that's a muscle that you can strengthen, right? You can strengthen your emotional intelligence. And I think that that's probably something, maybe something that, folks don't really realize that is a tool that they have in their tool belt. Um, but I think that's probably one of the biggest things that helped us kind of get to that and have that confidence. Obviously, doing our research and listening to accounts of other mothers and fathers who have, you know, gone through that free birthing experience too, and doing, research online. But I think having that emotional, muscle was one of the biggest things.
Did your wife ever have any doubts during the pregnancy? John, are we doing the right thing? Should we go to the hospital, see a doctor?
100%. Yes. Yeah. The whole time. And well, I take that back. It was, there was this confidence and this determination from my wife that we are going to do this. And I think, doubt started to, creep in naturally, right? But I think that's where I, that was my role, was to back her up, right? And so I think because of that, we were a team going into it, and we were able to do that together. Because I'll give you a story about, how the opposite effect can happen. So we have a friend who, just recently gave birth, and she was planning a home birth, right?
Okay.
Her and her husband, they had a midwife, and then out of nowhere, outside of their plan, two family members show up, and they're there, and they become nervous to the point where they called 911, and then that totally disrupted her birth plan. She was going through the natural stages of birth, and her family intervened because they were fearful. And so she ended up transferring to the hospital, where she gave birth naturally, um, almost right away. Right. So that would have happened at home. But because of the fear of their family that was introduced to the process, that ended up in a hospital transfer.
But what made them call 911?
I don't remember quite the details of the story, but there was fear that was introduced, and it was because they were uncomfortable. And in the husband, and in my opinion, should have said, "Hey, we're not going to do this. This is what my wife wants," and he should have handled that. And I don't think that he really did a good job, quite frankly, of
Okay.
handling that.
Maybe he wasn't in the room. Maybe they did it before, in another place. They were panicking amongst themselves and say, you know what, and somebody wanted to be the hero and say, you know what, enough is enough. Let's call 911 type of thing.
Perhaps. Yeah, I don't know the details of what happened there, but
That can ruin a
yeah.
family,
Well, it altered the story of the birth at the very least.
which is a big deal for the parents.
Oh, and especially for the mom,
Yeah.
because she had this plan, she has this vision. That's the fundamental difference between men and women, is women can give birth, and that's something that's so sacred to women that we need to respect that as men. and
Absolutely.
and that comes about by making sure that you protect her and give her that space and give her what she wants to try to create. No birth story plays out exactly as it's planned. There's always something that's a little different, and
Sure.
as the extent to which that you can help kind of create um a story that it lines up with that, or at least give it your best effort. I think that's our job.
Speaking of which, what would you say to expecting fathers that are either, it doesn't have to, well, it could be a home birth or a birthing center. What would you say is their job? What should they look out for? What should be the role the day of?
Yeah, I think the day of is well, again, I think your job as the husband of an expecting mother or the partner of an expecting mother is to give them that container, that safe space to help her feel safe, help her feel comfortable. And that's done by, handling conversations with family, handling conversations with your midwife or doctors, or however you plan to do your birth, handling those conversations. And I think it's totally fine in a hospital setting to talk to the doctor and say, hey doctor, you can talk to me about this. I want my wife to be comfortable, and she wants me to talk to you about this. You're well within your right to do that. And so I think handling that and just taking anything off of your wife's plate that could introduce fear or could cause her to question her own natural abilities. That's your job.
Yeah, you're taking care of her basically. She's she's going through a whole lot of pain, and your
Yes.
priority is just making sure that she's got everything she needs. She needs a glass of water, get her a glass of water, cold towel, cold towel. You're on it. You got to be on it, you know? And that's what I did. I was like I was like the go-to,
Yep.
go pick up, give me a tissue or something or some grapes because because they tell her that she needs to eat to have the energy to go through this. But she obviously she can't she has no appetite, right?
Right.
And but little things like that you need to tend to. It was just I'm thinking about it now as we talk, and it was such, it's like a blur, but at the same time, I remember specific moments, and I think back to it, and I was like, how did I even get through it all? And I'm not saying, for me, it's nothing compared to what my wife went through, obviously, but
Right.
I was so focused on her that I neglected myself. I think I wasn't drinking water, I wasn't eating myself, and this was like the first one. It took, I think it was 18 hours of labor, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken. And so it was a long process. And I was so focused on making sure that she was okay that I didn't even take care of myself. And at the very end, I think I almost fainted. And this is the first time I'm announcing it in the podcast world. It's incredible that I'm doing this. I don't think I ever told anybody this, except my family, maybe. At the very end, my wife was grabbing onto my hand and like squeezing it really hard, like
Yeah.
I don't even know. Maybe she broke some bones, but I didn't even know. And I was like feeling really lightheaded. And then at some point, my wife looked at me and said, "Sit down for a second." And I was like, "Why? No, don't worry about me." And then the midwife saw me. Yeah, yeah, sit down. You look a little pale. So I had to sit down for a minute, and then, but after that, I was like, "No, I got to get back up." I was focusing on her again. So it's such an amazing experience, and uh, it's it makes you think and look back at your life and like, wow, what a defining moment. Was that like that for you?
Yeah, 100%. I remember, especially with my firstborn, that was the first time going through that birth process. And yeah, I didn't take care of myself. I was just solely focused on my wife.
Right.
And again, it's funny hearing you say that. I'm like, yes, I went through that exact same thing. Or I didn't eat for like 24 hours. And like I remember like because we had a hospital transfer for that birth too. And I remember getting to the hospital and just like seeing like my wife in the bed next to me and like she was like falling asleep and I'm like, okay, I can get some shut eye now. And I think I got like 3 hours of sleep and that was all I needed to get me through to the end.
Nice.
But yeah, in that uncomfortable chair that was next to the hospital. That's another thing about hospital births is for husbands, it's really uncomfortable. You got to sleep on some really uncomfortable
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, that's what yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have sat anyway. Apparently, the way I went through it, I wasn't even sitting. I probably should have sat a couple of times, but yeah, I hear you. John, let me know, what do you think? Why do you think home births or free births are so maybe not frowned upon? And I don't know how common it is in your area,
Hmm.
but like I told you earlier, over here it's like everybody thinks you're crazy if you want to do that. Why do you think most people look at it like in that way, like as if you're crazy if you want to do that?
I think we just been conditioned to think that way, honestly, throughout generations. I mean, if you think about it, when I was born, I remember my mom tells this story all the time. She said that her mom, my grandmother, would say, "Don't you breastfeed that baby? You give him formula." And that just kind of goes to show you the mindset. Um, we as humans, that's part of what makes us mammals, right? Is that we can drink milk from the mammary glands of our mothers, right? And why not? Like breast milk is one of the most nutrient dense substances in the entire world. And it is formulated specifically to give you, the baby, the nutrients that you need to grow and develop. Um, and so I think that's just one example of how, for generations, we've been conditioned that birth is a medical procedure. You do not have what you need to raise a child. You need to be dependent on the system. And so I think, this is I am very much a libertarian, and I am very much kind of like anti um, government, big government, and I think that this is kind of like part of a the it all starts at birth. Dependency on systems, dependency on government, dependency on health institutions, dependency on public institutions starts at birth, and I think that's a great example of that dependency. So I think it's a long-term conditioning, in my opinion.
I think probably a lot of people are scared too, to not have that support,
Exactly.
that medical support behind them in case something happens, because people have a negative mindset, a lot, a lot of the times, and they just think, well, what if this happens or what if
What
that
if?
happens?
Hmm.
I need to be in the hospital. And the fear probably is that they think that their baby's gonna die if they're
Yes.
not born in the hospital.
Well, and that's what they're told.
Yeah,
That's what they're told. And quite frankly, it's that's the, for lack of a better word, propaganda that we are consuming, is that, you know, it's well, what if something goes wrong? Don't you want to have, they're selling insurance to you essentially, right? You get baby insurance, go to the hospital so that if something goes wrong, you're covered, right? But the reality is that may be a risk that you don't want to take or don't need to take. I would look at hospitals as more of a risk than a than insurance, honestly,
right.
because of everything that we just talked about, of how it's a business and how they need to turn tables, they need to turn beds, they're trying to move you through, they're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, when birth is totally different, because people's bodies are different, women's bodies are different, right?
Yeah.
And that's, it's not a medical emergency. And so for all of those reasons, a hospital is the worst place to give birth. And so I think um what you're giving up is not worth what you're gaining by going to a hospital. But we're conditioned to think that. We're
Oh
conditioned
yeah.
to think that that's what you do.
What would you say are some of the risks that you had to consider before
Mhm.
making the decision, or that led to the decision?
Yeah, obviously there's risks in home birth. There's risks in going to a hospital. There's risks in anything, in getting into your car and driving to the grocery store. There's a risk that you could get hit by a semi truck, right? And
Yeah.
so why go to the grocery store if you're going to get hit by a car? It's the same thing, right? And so it's fear drives a lot of our decisions in today's world. And yeah, and no one wants to lose their child in childbirth. No one wants to experience complications. But as humans, humans have been giving birth and reproducing for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's only within the last 150 that birth has happened in a hospital and that we're feeding babies, formula.
Yeah. And I think was it probably another determining factor for a lot of women has to be the fear of the pain. Because what do you get at the hospital, right? You get the epidural.
You can elect to have an epidural.
Well, let's admit it. Probably most of them do, right?
Uh,
I don't know what the stats are on those, but I mean,
yeah, I don't
I
know
I
what the
I
stats
hear
are.
a lot of women. Again, they usually go for it. From what I've heard, they always go for the epidural to
And
numb the
that's
pain.
out of fear of the pain.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think, and you're not obviously you can't do that at home. So
But where does that fear come from? Why? Why block that pain?
they've been conditioned, like it's like we said, they've been conditioned to not want pain, to avoid
Well,
it.
I think it stems from a disbelief in their own abilities. And women are powerful because they have the ability to give birth,
Yeah.
right? And so, but in order for that to happen, they need to believe in their bodies. Women need to believe in their bodies. And if you don't believe that your body is capable of doing this, then yeah, of course you're going to want the epidural. Of course you're going to want to go to a hospital. But kind of bringing it full circle, that's our jobs as men and as fathers is to remind our wives that their body works just fine. And that helps them give them the confidence that they need to make that decision to say no to the epidural. Because, yeah, I'm a man. I don't know that I have never experienced the pain of childbirth, and I will never experience the pain of childbirth. And it is painful from what I can see and from my experience, and just sympathizing with my wife because I can't empathize with her. And but I do know just from seeing it from her perspective is that that pain is worth it. And it's worth it just from kind of afterwards, the whole mentality of I did it. I went through this. I overcame this painful experience, this challenge. And that is so rewarding to see. From my perspective, it was rewarding to see. I can't even imagine what it's like for my wife to say, you know what? I did it. I went and I said, fuck you to the medical system. And I had a baby on my own and I did it without any interventions. And I just hats off, man. Hats off to women and
Yeah.
being able to do that.
Yeah, it's probably for my wife the most proud thing that she's ever did. She's the most proud of having given birth to two kids, no drugs, no hospital.
Hell yeah, man.
And I remind her of it too sometimes. When she'll complain about a cold, I'll I'll just remind her, you gave birth, no drugs. Come
Yeah.
on, this is nothing. And then she thinks back to that time, and she had a lot of people doubt her, just like I told you earlier, friends and family. Like, are you sure? And at some point, the family, they came around and they accepted it, but they still had their
As
doubts.
family do.
Obviously,
Yeah.
they didn't voice it as much, near the end of the process. They wanted to be supportive, so that's great.
Yeah.
But you could tell that they were worried and not fully on board with this. But I mean, it was our decision, so that's it. And thinking back to those times, she's just, like she showed everybody, look what I did. And meanwhile, you're getting drugged and not actually experiencing it to the full extent that you're supposed to.
Yeah. Well, first of all, hats off to you and your wife for doing that, especially it with, like you say, in a community that maybe that's not the norm or that's isn't practiced as much.
at all.
So, I mean, thinking of the folks that I know, maybe it's just a product of, my network and the people that I know around here. I'm in Virginia, in the United States. So, maybe, I'm sure there's differences between here and in Canada, in that regard. I know a lot of couples and moms and dads who wanted to do the home birth route, who have tried the home birth route, have been transferred to hospitals, and that story is just so common, at least among my circle of friends and family. Um, but yeah, hats off to you and your wife for doing that. That's amazing.
Thank you. And likewise, look, it's truly amazing what you did as well and your wife. It's a little bit scary when you told me the story initially, but that's yeah, that's crazy. Very impressive. I also wanted to ask you, what do you think? Because some people might be listening to this and saying, oh, it sounds good. It sounds right, doing it at home and it's peaceful and just with my husband. I do have my doubts though. What kind of questions should they ask themselves to help them decide if yes or no, it's for them, if it's right for them? Maybe some of the questions that you ask yourself and your wife ask yourselves to finally come to this decision.
Yeah, I guess. uh, Well, we did have, our experience with the first two really shaped how we viewed, birth. I would recommend to first time expecting parents to reach out to other folks who have, maybe they've done a home birth, or maybe they've gone to a birthing center, or maybe they've had a midwife, something other than the traditional hospital, going to a hospital, because that is the most common, birthing method these days. And so, going against the norm inherently comes with, questions that raise doubt in your mind. And I think one of the best things you can do is just reach out and hear personal accounts from other people. Statistics are just going to scare you, right? And so, you're not a statistic. Your story is different. Your birthing story, your body is different. And so, I mean, that's what I would recommend is, in maybe asking, who can we talk to that would give us valuable perspective on this. And I would say that the more perspective you can get, the more confident that you will be in whatever decision you come to.
That's great. That's great advice. And I do think that people should consider it, just to be clear. I think it will be such a peaceful moment, an intimate moment that you get to live not surrounded by bright lights and machines and doctors and nurses, which again, it doesn't seem natural when you think about it.
No, it's not. No,
Yeah,
no,
so it's something to
no.
think about for sure. And there's a lot of resources out there for people that are listening. Look it up. It's a lot more common now, I guess, and I've heard about it in the States more than where I am in Canada. Uh, People still think we're crazy. So, but it's something to look into and maybe ask yourself if it's right for you and what kind of birth do you want for yourself and for your baby. Do you want your baby to be born at home? How amazing would it be to say, my baby was born at home
Yeah.
in my
It,
bedroom?
I will say it's pretty amazing to be able to say that. I tell my daughter that all the time. You were born just right over there, right? And she's like, in a tub? Yeah, in the water. Yay. Yeah,
Is
it
there
was an
any,
amazing.
because this was your youngest, right?
Yes.
I'm curious to see what do your eldest children think about it? How their sister was born at home. Is there anything there, or they don't think about it? It's not something, or maybe you didn't go that far into details with them.
Oh, we do. We tell them. And I don't think they quite fully understand. And that's totally fine.
Sure.
One day they will understand, and we'll talk to them all about that and share our experience, and maybe that experience will help them influence their own decision, when they decide that, or if they decide to have kids one day, right? And that's kind of like reversing this generational cycle that we've been in for the last 3 or 4 generations, right? Of hospital births and that being the norm. And so this is, one step towards breaking that chain.
Absolutely. That's yeah, that's great, man. John, thanks again for doing this and for sharing your story. It's a very personal story. Do you tell that to everybody, or is that like the first time that this will be public?
Yeah, Ran, this is going to be the first time that I've shared that story on a podcast, in a public forum. So, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for allowing me to share that story. I've been wanting to tell that for my daughter's 4.5 now. So I've been wanting to share that story for quite some time.
Thank you so much, man, and you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, I would love to talk about other topics as well. So yeah, I,
We'll
I
do it.
love the fact that you're all in on being a great dad and getting better every day, and love the content that you're putting out on X. And yeah, thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, John.